What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. My name is Daniel, and I have a very special episode for you all today. Today is going to be my mock draft. So, unless you've been living under a rock, the NFL draft is next Thursday, and I thought it was finally time to unveil who I think is going to go in the first round of the NFL draft. It's going to be very interesting. Since I'm a Bears fan and I've, of course, make a lot of episodes on why the Bears are making the wrong or right choices, I'm especially interested because they had the number one pick until they, of course, traded it down to number 9 with the Carolina Panthers. But I'm not just going to be talking about the Bears, all right? I'm going to be talking about every other team in the first round of the draft. So there are 31 picks, 31 players who I think are going to go off the board, and I will share why I think they're going to go off the board. It's going to be a very fun episode today, but before we get started, I do want to just go through a little bit of couple rules about the mock draft. The first one is that there's only 31 picks in the first round, and that is because the Miami Dolphins do not have a first round pick. You're probably wondering, oh, Daniel, did they trade it to another team? No, actually, no one has the Miami Dolphins first round pick this year because the Dolphins were caught in a tampering violation by the NFL. They were trying to illegally sign Tom Brady and Sean Payton onto their organization when they were either, I believe, in retirement with Sean Payton or still on another team with the Buccaneers. So ultimately, the Dolphins owner, a guy named Stephen Ross, was suspended from coming to games or Dolphins facilities for 10 games. They got fined, but probably most importantly, they got their first round pick taken away. So that's why there's only 31 picks this year in the first round. And like I mentioned before, this mock draft is also only going to be one round. If I made a 3-round mock draft, 4 or even 7-round mock draft, it would be even longer than my episodes normally are. So that's why we're just doing one round today. Another thing about this mock draft is that this mock draft I'm approaching in terms of what I think is going to happen on draft day. This is not necessarily what I think is right for the team. Obviously, that plays an important part, but this is kind of how I think it's going to go. Obviously, the further down the board you get, the less accurate my mock draft will probably be, but who knows? Maybe I'll go 31 for 31 and I'll be able to flex on everyone. It'll be like the watered down version of getting a perfect bracket. Before I get started, I do want to just plug one thing, and that is the final episode of my radio show, Chicago Sports Unlimited, which is going to air next Thursday, the day of the draft. I know, next Thursday at 4 o'clock. It's going to be a little bit of a longer episode. Probably I'm going to invite some guests onto the show, and we're going to just answer some questions. It's going to be a very fun time. And I've had the radio show for 2 years now, and so I'm very sad that it's coming to an end, but I encourage everyone to go and listen on 88.1 FM. That's right, it is on the radio. I know, what is this, 1897? If you have a radio, then go to 88.1 FM, or you can go to our website, WNTHradio.com, or download the WNTH app, which is in every app store under the sun. So with, the shameless plug out of the way, let's get into the mock draft. All right, so number 1 overall, those of you who've seen my previous 2 mock drafts, which I haven't really circulated super, further, the very small amount of people I think have seen the 2 mock drafts. They were kind of just test runs. I had CJ Stroud going number 1 overall to the Panthers, but something happened this week that changed my opinion. I now have Bryce Young going number 1 overall to the Panthers. It's probably not that shocking, but this is what kind of changed my view. Before, I kind of thought that the Panthers, with a new head coach, a new owner, are going to be kind of going in a little bit of a experimental direction, so to speak. They're not going to be kind of thinking a little bit, they're going to think a little bit outside the box. And so I thought they're going to take CJ Stroud, who many see as not the number 1 quarterback in the draft. But then I learned that on like Wednesday or something that Bryce Young, who's already met with the Panthers organization in the pre-draft process, has canceled the rest of his pre-draft interviews with other teams, which is a pretty good sign that the Panthers are saying, we're going to take you number 1 overall. We're not trading the pick. Not that they were going to anyway. They already traded up for it. And, you're the guy. So that's why I think Bryce Young is going to go number 1 overall. And it makes sense. He is the best quarterback in the class. He's probably the best player in the class. He is a fantastic dual threat quarterback. Obviously, the thing with Bryce Young is that size is a concern because he's only, I think, 5'10", maybe 5'11". He measured in at like 205 pounds at the combine, but he probably played at Alabama around 190, which, like, for a football player, that's probably on the lighter side, even for a quarterback. But, it's not like small QBs are super uncommon in the NFL. Like, obviously you want your QB to be taller, but we've seen guys like Drew Brees have perfectly good careers, being a smaller player. But obviously the big thing with Bryce Young is his durability. Is he going to be able to last in the NFL? Honestly, I don't really know. But what I do know is that Alabama is an elite school that produces NFL player after NFL player. Even if they haven't been strong at quarterback historically, they're starting to get a little bit better now with guys like Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts as well. And also, they've sent smaller guys to the NFL, and they've done fine. Look at Devontae Smith. So I think that Bryce Young goes to Carolina first overall. So at number 2, that puts the Houston Texans on the clock. Now, they're in a tough position because we're just like one Jordan Atkins touchdown away Jordan Atkins drops touchdown away from getting the number 1 overall pick. Thank you, Lovie Smith. You are forever in debt to us as Bears fans. We are forever in debt to Lovie Smith as Bears fans. No, he's already paid off his debts, so to speak. But yeah, so the Texans now have the 2nd overall pick. The Panthers leapfrogged them, got Bryce Young. So I think the Texans are going to still take a quarterback, and they're going to take CJ Stroud. Now, in my opinion, he's the 2nd best QB in the class. He's mainly a pocket passer, I think, but the more you watch him, the more you realize he is a fantastic scrambler, just like Bryce Young, just like most of the good QBs in the NFL right now. If you just watch the game that he played versus Georgia, which I know they ultimately lost, but it was not his fault. They absolutely shanked the field goal that would have, I think, sent it into overtime, I want to say. But the poise that CJ Stroud showed and just the clutch factor that he had was unlike anything we had seen from him probably in his entire career at Ohio State. He is a guy who just has a lot more dog in him than I think a lot of fans and experts previously thought. So DeMeco Ryans, the new head coach for Houston, I think is going to have quite the quarterback on his hands for his first season in Houston. Now, this was a Houston Texans team that made a pretty significant investment in the offseason. I think more than I expected. I thought they were just going to be pretty quiet this year because they didn't really have any incentive to do super well next year. They're still a couple years away. But they brought in Robert Woods. They brought in Dalton Schultz, a really solid tight end for the future. We'll see how long Robert Woods is there. He's kind of in the twilight of his career. But bringing in CJ Stroud to the fold, that's pretty good. And, they brought back Laramie Tunsil. This is a Texans offense that's starting to show what it could be now bringing in CJ Stroud, as I have predicted. So there you have it. Texans at 2 take CJ Stroud. Now at 3, that puts the Arizona Cardinals on the clock. And I have them taking Will Anderson Jr. I think he's arguably the best defensive player in the class. I think I like Jalen Carter a little bit better than him, but that does not mean he's not a good player. Will Anderson is a edge guy, so he's going to be a pass rusher, and the Cardinals just really need a good pass rusher because Hassan Reddick is not on the team anymore. Chandler Jones is gone. This is a Cardinals defense that has some good pieces, guys like Isaiah Simmons and Budda Baker, but hadn't really been able to put it together. Now they have a new head coach in Jonathan Gannon, former defensive coordinator for Philly, and I think that when they add Will Anderson, that's going to give the defense a lot more like oomph that they really need. Will Anderson, he's from Alabama. He had a really good season in 2021. I believe he broke like a sack record there. He had like 15 sacks, and his 2022 season was not as good, but it was hard to be better than his 2021 season. So I think that Arizona is getting a really, really solid player with a lot of upside in Will Anderson, who's going to bolster that defense. Of course, with the Cardinals, all eyes are going to be on Kyler Murray because he's the quarterback and he plays a lot of Call of Duty. I don't know, but the fact is he's probably not going to play in the first couple games of the season at least because he's coming off of the torn ACL. But people forget that Jonathan Gannon is a defensive-minded head coach. And Arizona, they had kind of a quiet offseason, but they make a big splash here and bring in Will Anderson to the fold, and that's going to make them significantly better. All right, there's someone walking their dog right outside where I'm recording, so I'm praying that he does not bark, and you guys do not have to hear those sounds in the background. So I apologize in advance. But we'll move on to pick number 4 now. I think that the Indianapolis Colts, who hold this pick, are going to take Anthony Richardson. He is a quarterback from Florida. Now, he is a very polarizing player. You have guys like Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, pretty agreed upon to be solid blue chip prospects to be, really solid in the future. However, Anthony Richardson is a guy who definitely has the physical tools there, but is he going to be able to develop himself into a consistent, balanced quarterback? That is to be determined. Now, Indianapolis, they got a new head coach this offseason. Jeff Saturday's reign of whatever it was as interim head coach is over. They've hired Shane Steichen, the former Eagles offensive coordinator, and they're going to get Anthony Richardson here, I think. Now, he's a guy who ran a 4.42 40. He has a 40-inch vertical, absolute cannon for an arm. You watch Anthony Richardson for about 5 seconds and you understand why he's going 4th overall. This is a guy who's barely started in college. He's only been a starter for 1 season. But it's the physical tools that have boosted his draft outlook so far. He had a great combine as well. He threw pretty well as pro day additionally. So obviously he shows signs that he can be a good passer as well. But accuracy is still an issue. Decision-making is an issue. Trying not to be like a one-read quarterback, figuring out how to read defenses, it's still something that's kind of a work in progress. So whoever drafts him, and I think it's going to be Indianapolis, is going to have a tough job on their hands. But it's a very high-risk pick, but it's also a very high-reward pick if it works out. So at number 4, I think Indianapolis takes Anthony Richardson. All right, so at number 5, this pick is held by the Seattle Seahawks. Now, I have them taking Jalen Carter, the interior defensive lineman out of Georgia. Now, those of you who have listened to the radio show in the last month or so probably have heard this guy's name because I've mentioned it a couple times. This was the guy I wanted the Bears to take for a while when they had the number 1 overall pick, because he's probably the best defensive player in the draft. I think he's better than Will Anderson. It's kind of apples to oranges, but whatever. He's a fantastic player on the defensive line. I mean, he can pass rush. He can stop the run. He's extremely versatile. You're not going to see him play on the edge. You're going to see him kind of just being a force in the middle, being a guy who attracts, 2 offensive linemen, 3 offensive linemen to try to block him. The biggest knock on Jalen Carter, the biggest reason why he's not going in the top 3, outside of the fact that there are some very desperate teams that need a QB, is the off the field issues. And obviously that's an issue. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look it up. But, Jalen Carter was arrested because him and one of his Georgia teammates were illegally racing after they won their national championship. It was a very tragic situation. It resulted in 2 deaths of Georgia players, and Jalen Carter was not driving the car that ultimately like crashed and killed a couple players, but he was involved in that whole situation. So he's not going to go to jail, fortunately, but still, this is the kind of thing that NFL teams really just do not like and they want to avoid. However, the reason why I still have him going at 5 to Seattle is because of their head coach. I mean, Pete Carroll is not this very like tactical, guy who's going to like outmaneuver you like Bill Belichick or something. Like Pete Carroll is a player's coach. He's always been. That's always been his MO as a head coach. And so Seattle has dealt with players who have had off the field troubles before, even when they were contending for Super Bowls. Guys like Richard Sherman, Brandon Browner, Marshawn Lynch had some issues back in the day. But Seattle was able to still get really good performances out of them and, keep them out of trouble. So I think that they get Jalen Carter here, and if they can keep him, from any off the field shenanigans, he's going to be a force. Like every other quarterback and offensive line in the NFC West is going to be scared of this guy if he can move his talent from college efficiently to the NFL. So at number 5, I have Seattle taking Jalen Carter. All right, so now at number 6, the Detroit Lions get to pick here. This pick comes courtesy of the Los Angeles Rams in the Matthew Stafford trade. I think Detroit's going to take Devon Witherspoon. I'm trying not to butcher his name. He's a cornerback from Illinois. He's probably the best corner in the draft, and he's one of those cornerbacks who he's the number one. He's the Sauce Gardner, the Jalen Ramsey, the Darrelle Revis. He is an island cornerback. And the biggest indicator to me that Detroit was going to go after a corner was the fact that they just traded Jeffrey Okudah, a guy who they drafted 3rd overall to be this same type of corner, to Atlanta for like minimal return. They got back like a 5th round pick for him. I don't think they even should have traded Jeffrey Okudah, to be honest, but I kind of get why they did, because he struggled with injuries, even though every time he's played, he's been totally fine. But Detroit, that's not the only loss they've suffered in the secondary. I mean, they lost Oruwariye as well, Amani Oruwariye, one of their good corners who had like 6 picks a couple years ago. They lost him to free agency, and even though they replaced these guys with Cameron Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, and C.J. Gardner-Johnson, they still need more, and so I think that's why they take Devon Witherspoon, a good corner out of Illinois, who had a fantastic season. He's continued to get better in the 3 seasons he's played in college, and there are some people who are saying Detroit's going to take a QB because, Jared Goff, but I disagree. I don't think QB is their biggest problem. So they bolster the defense here with another first-round pick later in the draft with a good corner from Illinois. All right, so now at pick 7 is where the Los Angeles Raiders get to make their pick. This one, I think, is going to be an interesting pick. This very well could be a trade. The Raiders could trade up further if they don't want the quarterback that I'm going to have them take. But, the Raiders, they're always a team that they make the picks that they want to make. Like Al Davis, he's no longer with us anymore. However, he just sometimes comes down from the heavens and makes the pick that he knows the Raider faithful want him to take. And so I think at 7, the Raiders are going to go quarterback here. They're going to take Will Levis, a QB out of Kentucky. Now, this guy was listed at 3 in terms of my top quarterbacks in the draft. I think Stroud and Young were better than him. But, Levis is a guy that's got great intangibles. I mean, he plays with a lot of intensity. He's a great locker room guy. I think that his leadership ability is very good. But he also has good physical attributes too. I mean, he's a strong guy, big dude, prototypical size. And he's pretty mobile too. But the thing is with him, he has some downsides. I mean, his accuracy is really inconsistent. Decision-making is still an issue. I also don't think that he's going to project to be as mobile as he currently is. Like, I'm not saying he's a bad athlete. I'm just saying that, like, my NFL comp for him was Matthew Stafford. And this is probably an unfair comparison, but I don't really care. Matthew Stafford is like 34 now. He really doesn't move that well anymore. So I don't think Will Levis is going to be doing the same thing. Like, I think he could lose his mobility in his late 20s if if he continues to be a starter, for most of his career. Now, you might say that Las Vegas has Jimmy Garoppolo, which I understand, but he's not going to be their long-term starter. Come on. It's not going to happen. I think that the Raiders need someone to jumpstart their team. This is a pick that Josh McDaniels is going to make to try to save his job, which I don't think it's going to work because he's not a good coach. Not a good head coach, at least. But I think just the main thing is they're just not going to win with Jimmy G. I really just don't see it, especially in that division that has 3 other very talented playoff teams. So Las Vegas makes a little bit of a gamble here to try to save the current regime, and they go out and get Will Levis at pick 7. All right, so now at pick 8 is where the Atlanta Falcons get to make their pick. Now, Atlanta is in kind of an interesting spot. They had a surprisingly busy offseason. They went out and they gave the bag to their 2 really solid offensive linemen, that being Caleb McGarry and Chris Lindstrom. They also went out and spent $60 million to get Jesse Bates, who was arguably the best free agent in the class this year, and they're not done yet. I think that at number 8, they're going to pick Tyree Wilson, who's an edge defender from Texas Tech. So unless you're a big draft guy like me, you might not really know who this guy is. He's often kind of an overlooked guy, comes from a smaller school, not like a Clemson or an Alabama or Ohio State. But I think this is still a pretty safe pick for Atlanta. I mean, Tyree Wilson, he's got a good amount of versatility on the defensive line. And so Atlanta still has Grady Jarrett in the middle of the defensive line, as well as new signee David Onyemata. If those 2 guys start to regress soon, which they could, they're getting older, they could throw in Tyree Wilson there to play inside. He could, but he's mainly an edge guy. That's where he had most of his snaps. So, also bring in Lorenzo Carter and Caden Ellis as well. We will see where he plays, but I think this is a pretty solid pick for an Atlanta team that has been kind of moving in silence like lasagna, so to speak. They have just been kind of very quietly, slowly building, and they're not as trash of a team as I think I thought they were. That might not sound like a compliment, but they're slowly getting there. So I think at 8, they go out and get another good piece for the defense in Tyree Wilson. All right, I had to take a drink of water here because we are at now pick number 9. That is where my Chicago Bears pick. And surprisingly, this pick is not actually as contentious as I thought it was going to be. I in 3 of my mock drafts so far, I have the Bears taking the same guy. This may be wishful thinking. This may be just me trying to think of a good script for the NFL draft this year. But, the NFL is probably a little more scripted than we think in some ways. I'm just kidding. I'm not one of those guys who thinks the NFL is scripted. That's just not true. But when I say who I think the Bears are going to pick, you're going to understand what I'm talking about. Because the Bears have a lot of needs, okay? And they plugged a good amount of them this offseason. They bolstered their linebacking core, which I think is probably pretty good for the time being with Tremaine Edmonds and TJ Edwards. They also do have Jack Sanborn, who's a dog. Their secondary is getting there with Jalen Johnson. Their safety core is pretty good with Jaquan Brisker and Eddie Jackson. But, the big thing they still need, they still have no pass rush. They really need someone who's a pass rusher. But I'm going offense here at the Bears. I think that the Bears are going to take Peter Skoronski, who's a tackle from Northwestern. So the Bears go with the local kid, and local kid not just because he goes to college there. He is from the Chicago area. He's originally from Park Ridge, Illinois, which is 20 minutes away from where I live. He's, the biggest knock on Skoronski is that he's got short arms, which, yeah, I guess, but everyone who says that he has short arms also understands that he really doesn't have a significant weakness. You will consistently see among scouts and draft experts that this guy is one of the safest picks in the draft. He's probably just one of the best players, a guy who just has a significant amount of talent already at his age coming out of the draft. Northwestern also has a pretty good history of producing linemen recently. You think about Rashawn Slater, who's a really solid tackle for the Chargers now. And so I think the main reason why I think this is the best choice for the Bears and what I think Ryan Poles is going to do is because Ryan Poles is a former offensive lineman himself, And he, I think, also understands that the Bears, they just need consistency on the offensive line. The problem has never been that the Bears don't have an offensive line full of talented players. Injuries have always been a concern. Guys not being able to have more than one good season has been a concern. The Bears need consistency. And I think they have the best chance at getting that with someone like Peter Skoronski. He can play left tackle. He maybe even would move inside. He's a guy who could play all 5 positions on the offensive line, which, I'm not in favor of the Bears doing some Kyle Long thing and trying to move him around everywhere. But what I'm saying is that depending on how the rest of the offseason goes and what more moves the Bears try to make to further bolster the offensive line, they could probably plug in Skoronski anywhere, and he would have a pretty good amount of success. This is already a Bears offensive line that has Tevin Jenkins. They still have Cody Whitehair for now. Braxton Jones was an underrated rookie at left tackle, and they signed Nate Davis, who's going to fill the right guard hole that has been missing for 10 years now. So I think Skoronski here's the pick. He's a local kid. He's a solid player, and the Bears hopefully get a blindside tackle for years to come. At pick 10 sits the Philadelphia Eagles. How do they have this pick? This is a pick that they got from the Saints because they traded down last year, I believe. And so the Eagles are going to take at number 10, I think they're going to take Lucas Van Ness. He is a edge from Iowa. So he's another pass rusher here. Now, hear me out on this one. The Eagles already have a good pass rusher named Hassan Reddick. He is a very good player. He absolutely demolished the Bears last year, and it made me cry. Figuratively, of course. But, that defensive line is starting to age a little bit. You got Fletcher Cox there, who's in his 30s. You lost Javon Hardgrave over to the 49ers. You brought back Brandon Graham, sure, but he's more of a defensive interior guy now, and who's not producing at the level that he used to a couple years ago. Lucas Van Ness is a very, he's a very scary player. His nickname in college was Hercules. This is a guy that you just do not want to face. He has a very good amount of power for an edge defender, and you think about it in the sense of, I think in a previous mock draft, I had the Philly taking Nolan Smith, which made sense because he's also an edge defender, but the way I see it, Nolan Smith is more of a speed guy, whereas Lucas Van Ness is more of a power guy. Hassan Reddick is definitely more of a speed-focused defender. So you're going to have this very scary pass rush combination with Hassan Reddick and Lucas Van Ness that's only going to make this Eagles defense better. All right, so now at pick 11 sits the Tennessee Titans. This is a Titans team that I do not think is in a good spot at all. They really lack direction. They don't have a lot of long-term talent. They have an aging quarterback. What are you going to do with Malik Willis? What are you going to do with Derrick Henry? This is a team that lacks direction. But I think that they're going to get a little bit more direction here, and they're going to get a good tackle for the time being. And that tackle is Darnell Wright from Tennessee. This may seem like a little bit of a reach. I think there are a lot of people who think that there are other good tackles on the board, like Paris Johnson, Broderick Jones, Anton Harrison, and they'll be picked later in this episode. But when you look at Darnell Wright, he'll probably play right tackle for the Titans, which is okay. But the big thing with him is that he is best in a run-heavy scheme. So when you're looking at the next 2 years, at least, with King Henry, who's basically your entire offense, why not go get another good run blocker? And I know the Titans are listening to trade offers for Derrick Henry, but why? Why would they trade him? They're going to get a 4th round pick for him at most? Just keep him. It's fine. He's not. This is the thing at the NFL trade market. You're not going to get what you want for him. Just keep him. So that's going to make your team better in the immediate future. So the way I see it, they get Darnell Wright, a good blocker for Derrick Henry, and, it makes their team just a little bit better. I thought about taking a wide receiver for them, but I think offensive line is just a more pressing need, in my opinion. You know who is going to take a wide receiver, though, is the Houston Texans, because at number 12, I have the Texans taking Quentin Johnson, a wide receiver from TCU. Now, there is some debate over who is the best receiver in the draft. There's like 3 or 4 real good receivers that are first round, worthy. But I think Johnson is going to be the first receiver off the board, and I'll tell you why. He's not the most polished receiver in the draft. Guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba and Jordan Addison probably have more route running prowess and, in some cases, better hands. But Quentin Johnson's got prototypical size. I mean, he's like 6'4", 220. Like, he is pretty quick for a guy his size. I think he runs in like the low 4.5s, maybe even 4.4s as far as a 40 time. He's a prototypical number 1 receiver. And I think they're going to give CJ Stroud a number 1 receiver for the future. Moving on now to pick 13. This is the New York Jets, and this is where they get another piece to their offensive line. I think that they're going to take Paris Johnson Jr., a tackle from Ohio State. Paris Johnson is he's a huge dude. He's like 6'7", I'm pretty sure. And I think this is a need for the Jets because, they have Mekhi Becton over at left tackle, but he's been pretty injury prone, and this is both a contingency plan for if he does not work out long term, but also a long-term option at right tackle, because their only other tackle on the roster is like Dwayne Brown, who is not going to last very much longer in the NFL. So on the upside, Paris Johnson, very solid tackle. I thought about him going to the Bears. I thought Skoronski was just a better option at that part of the draft. But if Mekhi Becton stays healthy, that is a scary tackle duo with those 2 giants over at left and right tackle with Mekhi Becton and now Paris Johnson. At pick 14, this is where New England makes a very, very valuable pick here. This is where they take Christian Gonzalez, a cornerback from Oregon. Now, I've seen this guy go as high as like pick 5. People see this guy in some cases as better than Devin Witherspoon, who I had going to Detroit at 6. I'm not really sure how he fell this far, but New England loves versatility, and they get that with Christian Gonzalez. He's not necessarily seen as a guy who's going to project into like a Jalen Ramsey type player, although he very well could, but he had a great combine. He ran in the 4.3s, and, Oregon's been a school that's produced a lot of good players recently, and like I said before, New England loves versatility. They also love cornerbacks. They've just produced good secondary talent, year after year after year, and so they get a good player at 14 for the defense. All right, now at 15, this is the Green Bay Packers. This is a team at a crossroads. Aaron Rodgers, he's sadly still on the roster. He has yet to be traded to the New York Jets. I don't see him playing for the Packers, even in the event that he stays, but he, I think, is literally and metaphorically packing his bags from Green Bay. And so what are they gonna do with their new quarterback, Jordan Love? Well, the most logical thing, of course, draft a wide receiver. I think the Green Bay is going to take Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is a wide receiver from Ohio State. Now, this guy has a really interesting story. Out of Florida in high school, he was like a 5-star recruit, I'm pretty sure. And then he went to Ohio State, tore it up for a couple years, but then got injured in his now junior year. So this guy barely played this season, but yet he's still going to go 15th overall in the NFL draft. That's how good he is. And in Green Bay, they're getting a good slot guy for Jordan Love, who now has a trio of really young wideouts who are, pretty promising. You have Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson, and now JSN. Now, for me personally, I'm not as crazy about Jackson Smith and Jigba as a lot of other people. I still hesitated to have him be the second receiver off the board because I frankly don't think he's the second best receiver in the draft. I think that long term he projects as a slot guy, but that's okay for a lot of teams, I think. And in the right system, he could be great. I also just love the idea of Green Bay finally taking a receiver in the first round after Aaron Rodgers leaves. So I think that this is where they get a good receiver. Smith and Jigba should be really good if he can stay healthy, and Green Bay, sad to say, has a pretty good offense for the near future. Okay, so at pick 16 here, this is where the Washington Commanders get to make their pick. This is a team that is on the heels of probably their best moment since they won the Super Bowl back in the 90s, and that is, of course, the sale of the team out of the clutches of Dan Snyder, just one of the most universally hated people in sports. He finally sold the team to kind of a group of investors loosely aligned. I think the lead guy who put a lot of money into the team, I think he owns the 76ers. I think that's who bought them. There are a lot of parties bidding for it. There was some thought that Jeff Bezos was going to buy the team. That would have been really funny, but instead it ends up in kind of this group of investors that now bought the team for $6 billion. Dan Snyder does not deserve any of that money that he's getting from the team, but that's business for you. But what are they going to do with the 16th overall pick? I think they're going to go defense here. I have them taking Deonte Banks, a cornerback from Maryland. This is a really deep cornerback class this year. We've already seen 2 corners come off the board. I think that another one is going to come off the board later this round. And so Deonte Banks is a guy who had a really good combine. He ran in like the mid 4.3s, part of just like this duo of Maryland corners that were blazing fast. And he's got a lot of versatility too. And I think he's going to pair well with Kendall Fuller, who mainly does his damage in the slot. And that fills a big gap for the Commies, who have a pretty promising defense. They gave the bag deservedly to Deron Payne. They gave him like $95 million. And so now they get even better on the defensive side. Now, to a lot of people's surprise, they're not going with the QB here because they see their future quarterback as Sam Howell, their 3rd-round pick who played just a little bit last year. They got rid of Taylor Heineke. They didn't really re-sign anyone else. They got rid of Carson Wentz. Sam Howell is apparently going to be the guy going forward for Ron Rivera. So we'll see how long that lasts, but for now, they get some more cornerback help. All right, pick 17 here, the Pittsburgh Steelers on the clock. You know who they're taking. They're taking Joey Porter Jr., baby. The Steelers, they're a very traditional team. They do a lot of things, maybe a little bit archaically, but they get the job done. And, the Yinzer faithful are really going to like this pick. Of course, if you don't know, Joey Porter Jr. Is the son of Joey Porter, who was a great Steeler linebacker in the 2000s and I think late 90s. So, of course, he goes to the Steelers. Why not? But, it's not like the Steelers don't need cornerback help. I mean, they lost Cam Sutton, who was their best corner. They replaced him with Patrick Peterson, which is that's a pretty solid signing. And so Joey Porter Jr. gets to learn from a future Hall of Fame corner and joins an already stacked Steelers defense. They did lose Devin Bush this year. They're a guy in the middle, but any defense with TJ Watt and Minkah Fitzpatrick is already going to be pretty solid. So Steelers also improve their defense. All right, the defensive train continues here because at number 18, the Detroit Lions get another first-round pick. This one is their own pick, and I think they're going to take Kalijah Kancey, a interior defensive lineman from Pitt. That's where he went to school. Kancey is a really solid player. He's a really interesting prospect. People see him as kind of undersized, but he is very twitchy. He's more than just a guy in the middle. He's someone who can rush the quarterback at a pretty good rate. And, Detroit already has a pretty scary defensive line with Aiden Hutchinson and Romeo Okwara, but they're going to get better here. This is a Detroit defense that could really make some noise in the future, especially with Dan Campbell leading the way. It's funny, though. I remember there was a really undersized interior D tackle from Pitt 10 years ago, maybe out of the draft. Everyone was like, this guy's really undersized, but he had a really good combine. He got drafted by the NFL, by a team in the NFL. Was he any good? All right, anyway, we're moving on to pick 19 here. Tampa Bay Buccaneers are on the clock, and I believe that they're going to take Brian Branch, who is a safety from Alabama. Now, Tampa Bay already has a pretty good defense. They have Vita Vea. They kept Jamel Dean. They still have Carlton Davis. But Brian Branch is a guy who has a really good amount of versatility. He's listed officially as a safety, but he probably projects as a slot corner long term. Alabama has produced just so many good defensive backs over the years. So, Todd Bowles is going to have some choices where he can play him. He can either play him at the, free safety position with Antoine Winfield, or he could play in the slot with Jamel Dean and Carlton Davis. They really get to pick their battle here, or more like choose their own adventure with Brian Branch. He's a really solid player. At pick 20 here, the Seattle Seahawks get their other first-round pick, and I think they're going to use it on Nolan Smith, an edge defender from Georgia. This guy was really the biggest example of a guy who gained a lot of draft stock in the positive direction as a result of the combine. This dude ran like a 4.39 as an edge defender, which is more and more common now, but like 10 years ago, if you said a dude was going to run a 4.39 in the 40 as an edge, like someone would probably accuse you of being like crazy. But he's part of a very stacked Georgia defense that's led them to back-to-back championships. Seattle really just needs someone else kind of on the defensive line now that they have Jalen Carter as well, that gives them a little bit more juice, trying to rebuild the Legion of Boom, so to speak. And so they pair up the two Georgia players and have like a pretty solid D-line. That moves us now to pick 21 with the San Diego Chargers. I'm not even going to correct myself because they're still from San Diego. And I think the Chargers are going to use their pick on Brian Breezy, who is a interior defensive lineman from Clemson. This is a guy who like a year ago, people kind of thought he was going to go like really high up in the draft in the top 10. He's kind of fallen down the boards a little bit. He's a very good interior defensive lineman, and I think he's going to fill a need for a Chargers team that needs a lot of help on defense. I know they have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack, but this is the spot that they're in. And no, they're not going to take Bijan Robinson because they're not going to trade Austin Eckler. Why would they trade Austin Eckler? All right, moving on now to pick 22. The Baltimore Ravens are on the clock, and they're going to get some help for Lamar Jackson. I think that they're going to take Jordan Addison, a wide receiver from USC. If you ask me, I think this guy is better than Jackson Smith and Jigba. I think that he's probably more polished than Quentin Johnson, but the thing is he's a little undersized for the skill set that he has. I mean, he is a fantastic route runner. He is great at catching deep passes. And, I think the last time the Ravens took a receiver pretty high up, it was actually Rashad Bateman. But the time before that, it was Marquise Brown, who was more of a speed guy. Jordan Addison, he's pretty quick, but he's not necessarily a speed guy. He's more of a possession guy. If you're thinking about this in like Madden terms, he ran a 4.49, which some people saw as slow. I think those people are nitpicking. So I think that the Ravens kind of get a little bit of a piece to try to keep Lamar Jackson in Baltimore and also just get a really solid receiver who will definitely find a role in the offense. Now, at number 23, I think that Minnesota is going to take Emmanuel Forbes, a cornerback. I considered a receiver for them, but with Justin Jefferson and KJ Osborne and TJ Hawkinson, I just think corner is more of an issue. Emmanuel Forbes, he's kind of a smaller guy. He's someone who's going to need to put on a little bit of weight once he hits the NFL, but super experienced. I mean, this guy was a 3-year starter at Mississippi State, and he's only a junior. I think Forbes on the team helps with the losses of Cam Dantzler and Patrick Peterson and tries to rebuild this Minnesota defense that also lost Eric Kendricks as well. We're nearing the end here, and at pick number 24, the Jacksonville Jaguars are on the clock, and I believe that they're going to take Anton Harrison, a tackle from Oklahoma. It's pretty basic. The Jaguars get more protection for Trevor Lawrence. They didn't really need anything else as far as skill positions on offense. They still have Travis Etienne. They still have Christian Kirk. And they franchise tagged Evan Ingram, who actually was pretty decent this year. And, they realized that Trevor Lawrence is going to be an elite quarterback and that they need to protect him. They already have put pretty significant draft capital into their offensive line the last couple years, but adding Anton Harrison to the fold that's never going to hurt. All right, now we're moving on to pick 25. This one is held by the New York Football Giants, and I believe that they are going to take O'Cyrus Torrence. What a name. He's a guard from Florida. This is a class that is pretty deep when it comes to the offensive line, especially at tackle. O'Cyrus Torrence is seen as the best guard in the draft pretty easily, which kind of tells you a lot about how good he is. Somehow this is still seen as a reach as Torrance is kind of seen as a guy who's not going to go until in the second round. But I think the Giants, they really need a guard. They're already good at tackle with Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas. And so they get a good protector for Daniel Jones because they're making the decision to pay him like $150 million. So if they don't get an offensive lineman for him, if I was Daniel Jones, I would be a little offended, to be honest. But then again, I also have $150 million. So, like, do I really care? I don't know. All right, we're moving on now to pick 27. This one is held by the Dallas Cowboys, and I think they're going to take Bijan Robinson. Look, you may think I'm crazy here because Dallas has Tony Pollard, but he's coming off of a season-ending injury, and Bijan Robinson is a probably top 3 player in terms of talent in the class, and he went to Texas, and the Cowboys are also owned by Jerry Jones, who does whatever he wants. Like, this is the flashy pick to end all flashy picks. When the Cowboys took CeeDee Lamb, they had more pressing needs on the team, but they still took CeeDee Lamb. There is no reason to me why the Cowboys would not take Bijan Robinson. And you know what? It would be a good pick. Bijan Robinson is arguably the best running back to come out of the draft since Saquon Barkley back in 2018. Only difference is that running backs are not valued as highly. There are some mock drafts that see this guy, Bijan Robinson, going in like the top 10. I don't think that's going to happen, but I don't think that Jerry Jones is going to let him slip out of his oil-covered hands. So I think at 26, Bijan Robinson goes to Dallas. All right, so at number 27, this pick is held by the Buffalo Bills. I believe they're going to take Broderick Jones. He's a tackle from Georgia. I mean, he is 1, 2, 3, 4. He's the 5th and final tackle to be taken in the first round. I think that this guy could go in the top 15, maybe not. Darnell Wright maybe won't go at pick 11. That may be a little bit of wishful thinking. But Broderick Jones is still a really solid tackle for Georgia, and I think he's going to find a good home in Buffalo, who could always use more help protecting Josh Allen. They don't have Cody Ford anymore, who was their right tackle for a while. They still have Deion Dawkins, but I think Broderick Jones is definitely going to help protecting Allen, who took a lot of hits last year. At number 28, I think that the Cincinnati Bengals are going to take Michael Mayer, who's a tight end from Notre Dame. There's like 4 pretty solid tight ends in this class. 2 I think that are first round worthy. This is one of them. The other one is a guy named Dalton Kincaid, who's from Utah State. Or is he from Utah or Utah State? I think he's from Utah. But anyway, look, I don't have Dalton Kincaid going in the first round. I think that he very well could go in the first round. I think the earlier mock drafts I made had him going at like 15 to Green Bay. The reason why I don't think he's going to Cincinnati here at 28 is because Michael Mayer is, a tight end from Notre Dame. He comes from a prestigious school when it comes to producing tight ends, and he's just a big target for Joe Shiesty. Dalton Kincaid is more like a big wide receiver who's a lot quicker and a lot more of like a Travis Kelce type guy. I think that Cincinnati already has a couple good receivers in T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and Joe Shiesty needs his just kind of big target, that can be an impact player in the red zone. So that's why Cincinnati takes Michael Mayer. All right, the last 3 picks here. Courtesy of San Francisco, the New Orleans Saints had the 29th pick, and I believe they're going to take Myles Murphy. Myles Murphy was another guy who was projected to go in the top 10, maybe even the top 5 a couple years ago, but now he's probably going to go, I think, in the later end of the first round. He's still a really good player, and New Orleans is just a solidly ran organization, and I think they know a good player when they see one. Is pass rusher their biggest issue? Maybe not necessarily. They still have Cam Jordan, who's still tearing it up, but I think at a certain point you have to start to plan for a future without him, and Myles Murphy is probably a good start, especially after they lost Marcus Davenport. That's going to hurt. All right, now pick number 30. This is held by the Philadelphia Eagles. This is probably a little bit of a reach, but it gets a little bit messy at the end of the first round, and I think that Philly is going to take Steve Avila, who is a guard from TCU. The second horned frog to go off the board in the first round after Quentin Johnson. Steve Avila is seen as a very solid guard, just a little bit worse than Osiris Torrance, but still a very good player. This is a guy I kind of want the Bears to draft, so maybe they'll get him. I don't know. But Philly really needs a guard because they lost Isaac Seumalo to the Steelers in the offseason, and so they get that guy in Steve Avila. And then to finish off the first round with the Kansas City Chiefs, the Super Bowl champions, they get another wide receiver to the fold, and that wide receiver is Zay Flowers. This guy, I think when you watch him, he screams Tyreek Hill, and the Chiefs, they get another speedy receiver that maybe actually can be a replacement for Tyreek Hill. Obviously, we saw Sky Moore had a very good Super Bowl. He'll probably have a bigger role in the next season. And they also lost Juju Smith-Schuster. They still have Travis Kelce, so we will see. But the Chiefs always could use more weapons for Patrick Mahomes, and I think they're going to find one with Zay Flowers. He's a very solid receiver. Some people think he's the best in the class. That's how good he is, and Kansas City just continues to play three-dimensional chess with everyone, and they go out and finish the first round with Zay Flowers. All right, well, after almost an hour of recording later, that is going to finish off this episode of the Commissioner's Office podcast. If you've made it all the way to this point, thank you very much for listening. I know mock drafts are long, but you know what? This is the NFL, baby. This is the dedication that I try to bring to you guys as much as I possibly can. So I just want to thank everyone again for listening. I'm very excited for the draft on Thursday. I always love watching it. So, you know, it's gonna be interesting to see if this draft is this mock draft I've just made is like actually correct or whether it's completely wrong. And, you know, it usually is completely wrong. But that's okay. I had fun making this. And just a reminder, make sure to tune in to the final episode of Chicago Sports Unlimited on Thursday at 4. You can find it on WNTHradio.com. It's going to be a very fun episode. And so without further ado, I'm going to be signing off here. Enjoy the draft, and I will see you all next time.